Hi everyone, welcome. As you can see, I've got a tray full of different types of food scraps to give my worms today. It's pumpkin, banana peels, some potato peels, lettuce bits. I don't recall if there was anything else in here, but there might be. And besides this, I've got some coffee and worm chow on the side, a little bit of grit and prepared bedding. I've tried to prepare all the normal fixings because a lot of people have been commenting in some of my videos lately. It's like, hey, you forgot the grit, you forgot the bedding, you forgot the worm chow, you forgot the coffee. So I figured today I would try to include everything. Really quick though, before we get started, let me just show you what we're dealing with. And man, oh man, doesn't this look complicated? But it's not really. Because really, like I said, I'm going to be feeding two bins today. And those two bins are simply depicted down here with the numbers 106 and 130. The system that's 130 days old is the one that you see out here on the bench already. And those 130 days consisted of, first, 28 days spent in buckets to try to create a breeding environment. And after those 4 weeks ended, they got dumped into here, into this container, which is now 102 days since they've been living in here. And these little numbers you see next to each container, these are just my sort of serialized project number, if you will, that I've got on my spreadsheet. So that just really helped me keep track of which system I was looking at on my tracking spreadsheet. Because, to tell you the truth, the reason I created this illustration was because I couldn't even remember what was going on with these two European nightcrawler bins. I thought to myself, if I can explain it to somebody, then I would understand it. But until I could explain it to somebody, I don't even understand it. So when we get around to feeding the other bin, the slightly younger bin that's 106 days of age now, that too originated from the same parent bin over here, which I guess I'm just showing a little bit more of its history. That parent bin was really set up for 51 days to help with the migration of the worms out of the material, but the majority of the time spent in that previous environment that these worms used to live in was in buckets as well. So those were everyday buckets onto a container for facilitating migration out of the material, and then into breeding buckets, finally into this container here. And the second subsequent haul out ended up becoming the way I launched off the sister bin over there. And then there was a final haul out, and it seemed like the bin we have right here was the best recipient for that, to see if we can try to balance out the numbers. The one thing I don't have on here though is the estimate of how many worms occupy these systems. And I don't know why, but somehow the number 1700 rings in my mind as possibly being what we've got each of these systems is somewhere near 1700, but I could be wrong. What I'm curious of seeing here, you might have noticed it on that board, but I didn't really mention it, was the presence of some nuts that I had put into here. A buddy of mine gave me a whole assortment of nuts that he kind of forgot about on his boat. And then when he stumbled on it, he was a little bit reluctant to eat this stuff. So he wanted to put it to good use somehow. He gave it to me so that I could give it to my worms. And that's what we had put down here underneath our feeding zone indicator, as well as under this top covering. Before we get too far along though, I just noticed a couple breeding worms connected to each other. That's just the way two worms look when they're mating. The rest of these worms here are all sort of individuals, although these two over here next to each other look like they're trying to buddy up maybe. So I wondered if this top covering would survive long enough to be possibly reused, and I think we could reuse it. It's not that bad, except for that big gaping hole in the middle, but we could probably still use it since it still presents as a single solid piece of material. But that feeding zone indicator was history, right? Good thing I've got a replacement here, and I guess if the other bin also has the same sort of results where the feeding zone indicator got gobbled up, then luckily I've got some other coffee filters off on the side that we could use to replace it with. So the nuts that we had out on top were almonds, and I could tell right away how a couple of the almonds were still clearly not eaten. However, it does seem like some of their skin, or that peel or whatever, that little outer membrane on the almond, was eaten off. This one even looks like it was almost completely stripped of its little skin. I even had some of those skins that were included down within the bedding, or down within the feeding. The feeding they got last time was stuff like I I think there might have been parsley, and there was a variety of things, which to me seemed like they would go really quickly. So now besides the almonds, there was cashew placed in here too, and I don't see anything that resembles leftover cashew. So maybe the cashews were really popular, and maybe the almonds were just a little bit less popular, although it does seem like the worms are working it gradually. Just seems like it's going to take a little bit of time. So that's what I was kind of interested in seeing. Maybe we can even, I don't know, do we want to continue on with the almonds to see how they do? Perhaps if we were to set them aside, stick them over there with the top covering paper, that would remind us to kind of drape them out in the middle on top of everything so that we can easily check in on how they're doing next time. So I'm guessing that's what we're going to see in the other bin too when we go in there to feed, because both of these bins that we're checking in on today were set up in a very, very similar way. So now, let's see. Moisture level's nice, worms everywhere. Yeah, it was only 9 days since that last feeding, but my main reason for wanting to come in so soon after that last feeding was mainly because of those nuts. I was very curious to see how the worms would have done with that stuff. And it seemed to me like if we waited very long, maybe the stuff would be gone already. So my hope was to sort of catch some of it in mid decomposition or mid consumption, if you will. It seems like we were pretty generous with the bedding down here in the feeding area. I could see some other leftovers here. I got banana peels and corn cob. Corn cob would definitely go back many, many feedings. The banana peel, though, I don't know. Could have been part of the last feeding. And they're going to get another banana peel today, too. Here's another chunk of it. So let's go ahead and excavate the feeding area so we can get today's feeding in there. Some of this other stuff that you see floating around here, I was starting to pile it up a little bit. Little bits of potato peel. You might have noticed I mentioned potato peel was one of the other things that they're getting today. The key difference, though, between what they got over here, who knows how long ago, probably many, many weeks ago, versus what they're getting today, is that the stuff that they're getting today was frozen, which should almost guarantee that it's going to get consumed quite quickly by the worms. As opposed to what they got last, not even last time, but, previously, who knows how long ago, not being frozen, sort of caused the stuff to just be around for a really long time. Because without being frozen first, it does seem like the potato peels take forever to break down. That's the stem of a pumpkin, and it felt like there was also another large object down here. Evidently a piece of another pumpkin stem. A couple pretty good sized chunks over there. 130 days old. We've still got time. I mean, I've got another system where the pumpkin stem actually went with the worms from their old system to their current system because the pumpkin stem just didn't break down in time to become castings, so it just followed with the worms into their new environment. Does seem like we mixed a good amount of bedding into the last feeding. I saw all kinds of shredded paper and cardboard bits and everything like that mixed in with this feeding zone. So why don't we stick with that? I want to be really generous on giving bedding to all my systems until I start to get that feeling like the system is running at or near its capacity. In the past, I always treated the bin's capacity as something to strive towards, in the end, and treating it as sort of a trigger point to say, hey, now we're done. But it seems like, hey, why not, run bins at or near their capacity from day one? And if I had stuck to that thinking, I would have already built this system almost full. But that would require a whole lot of bedding material, so I'm not really prepared to do that. Maybe some of my newer bins that I've got coming up one of these days, or I've got a population of worms that are presently migrating out of their environment, and I've got to prep some new bins for them, so maybe I'll have to keep that in mind in terms of giving them possibly a somewhat more filled up bin to start with, rather than one that's only maybe a third or a quarter of the way filled, with the anticipation of it eventually getting filled, and starting right off the bat with it being pretty much near its capacity. So all the old stuff went back in, and we can start divvying out this food somewhat evenly, I guess. Frozen pumpkin bits, I've got, I guess, what, 3 pieces here, and then we'll put the other 3 pieces into the other bin. This is like the butt end of a head of lettuce, and the rest of this is also lettuce leaves. Here's another butt end. We'll save that for the next bin that we feed, but maybe some of these other lettuce leaves can also be thrown down here. Potato peels, we'll see about giving them about a handful of that, and save the rest for the other bin. And maybe a couple more in that last handful, along with a few more little chunks of lettuce. And last but not least, we've got a banana peel to give each system. Well, that's actually one banana peel that I took one of the larger chunks off of so that it can go to the second bin. This piece of cucumber will go to the second bin as well. How does that sound? Very nice, very nice. I'm sprinkling in a little bit of pulverized eggshell to serve as the grit for this feeding. And we're going to top off the feeding with some yummy coffee. And following suit with what I've been doing nowadays with the coffee is applying it with some of my worm chow. Ooh, that's quite a bit. This worm chow has a bunch of leftover food from I guess I bought home some Chinese the other day, and then I dried out that entire container of rice they give you. I had some leftover noodles. So I took a bunch of cooked starchy foods, noodles and rice, and included them in that last batch. I included some leaves, because I remember somebody mentioning how they include leaves in their worm chow preparation. Seemed like a great idea, so I wanted to do that as well. I've also got some pumpkin seed laying around from some pumpkins that I've been carving up and feeding to the worms, so that those bits of white pumpkin that we gave these guys, all the seeds were removed from that pumpkin and put aside so that those pumpkin seeds can be included in my worm chow recipe. Bird seed, I got some bird seed that I bring in for my worm chow. So, I'm trying to remember, I thought there might have even been some other oddball materials that I had included in this last batch of worm chow, but it's not really coming to me right now. Very nice, very nice. This bin looks so good. So many castings piling up. 130 days of age. So that's what, a little bit over 4 months, I would say. Not bad. And I mean, in the grand scheme of things, in the past I might have treated that as a fairly mature bin and possibly one in need of being harvested soon. Or maybe I would start thinking that way because of the fact that I was at or near the bin's capacity. But I've been tending to run my bins a little bit longer nowadays. So I'm not really treating the fact that this is a 130-day-old bin as a reason to back off on giving them plenty of bedding and anything else. So I'm not sure what's going to eventually trigger my decision on getting these guys geared up for being migrated out of their castings, or possibly trying to tailor their feedings to be less prone to leaving leftover bits of scrap and debris within the material. I guess we'll have to play it by ear. This is actually among my younger systems, so it's got plenty of time to go. So I'm bringing back these couple of almonds, and I think that's what this is here too, but I'm not certain. Or is this potato? Yeah, this is just potato. Potato that's been sitting around in the bin for who knows how long. This is like a chunk of shredded paper here. Just figuring I'll try to break it apart into some smaller little pieces. This is what I've been doing whenever I encounter potato, because even like on this piece here you could see it attempting to grow, that little piece of growth on there. I'd really prefer just not to have potatoes attempting to grow in my worm bins. I don't know why. Not that it's a big deal, so. Alright, very nice, very nice. Before we put this top covering on, we're going to bring in this coffee filter. Curious to see how the coffee filter did in the next bin that we're going to check in on, the 106-day-old system. As far as these top coverings go, this one might actually be good for only one more feeding interval at this point, and then might require a replacement soon. I'm curious to see how the other one's doing. I think the other bin actually got a brand new replacement top covering last time, so maybe it's not going to show quite as many signs of wear as this one. Okay, back on with the top covering, plastic. And since I like seeing worms when I first come into my bin, I like how they come hang out under the plastic. I also like to try to block some of the light that would go through this translucent plastic bag by giving them some shade. Alright, on to the next one. Alright, this one should be, almost identical. Very similar at least. So let's see what we're in for here. I'm guessing we're not going to see any cashews, but we might see some leftover almond bits. As far as the feeding zone indicator goes, it seems like we're going to have to round up a replacement because it seems like they've done away with whatever might have been here as a feeding zone indicator previously. I don't know why, I just like having all these worms kind of out here to greet me when I first arrive inside the worm bin to feed them. So I'm not sure if we evicted all of them off this paper, but as long as it's folded over like that, they'll be in shade and hopefully not panicking. However, oh, this little guy was, out in the open on the plastic and was starting to panic from the bright lights. Here's another something trying to grow, and that just happens. I guess some of the stuff that you put in might be like tomato or whatever, something with seeds, cucumber, anything in there that has seeds that are viable might try to grow. But you know what? Before we disrupt things here too much, we gave both systems a fairly even split on the nuts. So, yeah, there we go. Before we stir it in and lose track of them, I figured we'd collect up these leftover almonds. I don't think we're going to see any leftovers of the cashew here either. But here too you could see bits of potato here and there. Wow, okay, here too. Once in a while I feel like I notice a little bit of warmth coming off the feeding zone in my worm bins, and it just makes me wonder if it's just the warmth of the worms all hanging out right there, or could it be possibly, the foods themselves in the process of breaking down and the bacteria within the foods causing the warmth. So I found 3 almonds, and I see something here which I wonder if that might just be the leftover little remnant of one of the cashews. I suppose I could taste it and then I would know, but I'm not going to do that. So I think we probably rounded up the leftovers. What is this? I'm wondering if this could just be some of that tape that I have on my on some of the cardboard that I include in my shredded material. This doesn't seem like something that would have been shredded. Maybe I had a piece of cardboard that had some of this reinforced tape on it. Although it does feel like it's breaking, so maybe it is in the process of breaking down. So let's not panic and try to remove it. We'll just leave it be and assume that it will break down over time. So we already kind of tilled up this outer edge over this side. Let's do the same here before we inspect the feeding zone, and then we'll reset and we'll be done. Okay. Things look really nice out here too. Even though this isn't where we were feeding, there's lots of worms hanging out in it. Okay. Just then when I see stuff clumping up a little bit, I try to break it apart if I can. Either if it's just like really muddy and clumped together because of that, or if it's just clumped together because it's perhaps a bunch of paper. Whatever the reason is, to me, something that's clumped up doesn't seem like it's likely to get a lot of worm traffic, or at least not on the inside parts of it. So I really want to sort of break it apart and sort of just in general increase its particle size, because to me a clump is just a single particle where the worms can sort of access it as far as, from the outside, but whatever's stuck in the middle of that clump seems like it's just not going to go anywhere. I wonder what this is. Actually, it looks like the maybe the end of a corn cob, just based on the appearance of it. But man, has it been worked down by the worms. So a lot of times I'll leave something like this just so that maybe in a future check-in we could bump into it again and see how it's coming along, but it's so small already I doubt that we're going to recognize it or bump into it in the future, so I figured I'd just break it up a little bit. Okay. I'm kind of feeling like when I lifted this bin, it felt a little bit lighter somehow than the first bin that we fed. So that almost makes me want to possibly go a little bit bigger here on applying the bedding, and I just happened upon another almond. So I think I'll just keep it. Here we go, another one too. We'll just keep them together, and we'll put them back out on the top surface so that during our next check-in we'll have an opportunity to once again see how the worms are doing with the almond. So cashew wins, almond is kind of just getting started in a way. Okay, so even though we found an entire piece of corn cob in the first bin, I think so far I've only seen a little itsy bitsy piece of corn cob here. And not too surprising, since we managed these bins very similar to each other, it's another piece of leftover, but this is pumpkin stem, and right next to it is yet another piece of pumpkin stem. And now we've got corn cob. Look at the worms within the middle of it. So I guess this is the system that had like busted up little pieces of corn cob in it versus the other one that had like an entire corn cob placed into it. And whether we're going to see any other leftovers besides those, I don't know, but we might not. Huh. This piece of corn cob seems just so strange, just by its diameter still being as large as it is. Because it seems like they get whittled down and they sort of compress or shrink over time. But that one being that large still just seemed a little bit unusual. Here again, all I'm really wanting to do with these little clumps of cardboard and paper and shredded paper and cardboard is to sort of dislodge them from themselves and spread them around. So yeah, we've already found like 5 pieces of corn cob here that almost amount to that one piece that we found in the other one. Here's a piece of banana stem, banana peel I think we found earlier, and a little bit more bedding that would probably benefit from being spread around a little bit more. Alrighty. Let's start focusing on getting this feeding zone reset. Gonna have to open it up a little bit more to fit everything. And sometimes I bump into something that I don't even recognize. I mean, it seems to have a stem on it. It seems to be like the cut off end of something. Sometimes I just want to like chip off a piece of it so I can see what's inside. Somehow from the appearance of it, it seems like it might be an avocado pit, but with that piece of whatever sticking off the end of it, I don't know what it might be. So a little bit of a mystery. But I think as far as exploring the feeding zone, I think it's time to reset and let these little guys get back to work. Potato peels. This one just somehow seemed to me big enough that it might want to start sprouting, so I thought I'd break it apart a little bit. Okay. Another piece of corn cob. And I think we've got ourselves a nice big space to put a whole bunch of fresh bedding down into, and then we could plop in today's feeding. So, I think in the previous bin we gave them maybe 2 handfuls. Why don't we up the ante for these guys and maybe include a 3rd. And I got a feeling next time we come in here, this stuff will have a tendency to be sort of clumped up a little bit. So maybe we'll have to break it apart. But I'm sure the worms will be traveling in and out of this stuff, as we saw with all this other material here. Kind of depositing their castings throughout it, exploring it, and then we'll be able to spread it out a little bit better next time and mix it in with the surrounding materials. So that's all the leftovers we found. Now in can go the fresh application of foods they're getting today. Some of this lettuce was frozen and it kind of broke into little itsy bitsy pieces. This bin also gets the butt end of a head of lettuce, also gets these 3 pieces of white pumpkin, also gets a bunch of frozen potato peels, which I bet by the next feeding will be for the most part gone, just based on the fact that they've been frozen prior to being put into the worm bin. So man, what a difference it makes on certain foods to freeze first. Other foods it probably doesn't make a whole lot of difference, like with the pumpkin. So I got a feeling with pumpkin they would just be at that stuff and they would eat it right up 1, 2, 3. Same with the cucumber, but somehow with the potato they just need a little bit of help seeing that stuff break down a little bit first before they can start to make use of it as a food item. Alrighty, so hopefully I've not left out anything. And I guess in the interest of not leaving out anything, I'm going to grab myself another feeding zone indicator, I think, so that I can lay that down here on top of the almonds after we lay the almonds out. But first we'll spread out the material that we have here kind of evenly and level things off. And on can go the almonds. But let me go grab a replacement feeding zone indicator. There we go, and I think here too, even though there's a large hole chewed into the middle of our top covering newspaper, I think it'll be good enough to go one more round. But perhaps by the next time we check in on these systems, this piece of paper will also be ready to be recycled and used as just supplementary bedding down in the feeding zone. But for now, it's just going to be a place for the moisture to kind of collect, you know, as it tries to recirculate within the system beneath the plastic. It becomes sort of a nice little hangout spot for the worms to come up and socialize on. Alright, well, that's it for today's check-in with the European night crawlers. And it was interesting to see how the nuts came along. I didn't really know what to expect, but I sort of thought that the cashews would go quicker than the almonds. But for anyone who was unsure of what to expect, now you know. That's how the worms do it. When they get cashew and they get almond, cashew goes 1, 2, 3. The almond goes a little bit more slowly. Alright everyone, that's it for today's check-in. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to let me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always very much appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. Alright everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.